Hi, I'm Gavin,
And I'm Ryan.
and this is The Sound Project. So we're going to do something a little different today.
Yeah.
Today we're going to cover Archaeoacoustics, which admittedly has absolutely nothing to do with my day-to-day job.
Yep.
But it is something that I have presented on at universities, and I just think it's really cool. And so I figured it'd be fun to make this an episode of the podcast and talk about Archaeoacoustics. So what is archaeoacoustics, right? And so archaeoacoustics is a branch of archaeology that focuses on the acoustical properties of some of these different historical sites.
Sure.
And it's really fun, and we're going to go through some case studies and talk about different sites around the world and some of the acoustical ramifications that their designs have. And but the big question that we have to answer is, was it intentional or not? Because some of these things, I guess there's a few different ways you can look at things. You could say that, these were an integral part of the design. It was intended for it to be this way.
Right.
Or it could be something that's like an accidental byproduct of the design, and it was exploited and used in a certain way. But then the other thing is it could be that it was unintentional part of the design, and it was never used that way, and we're just now discovering it, and it's something that we're looking at now. And so I want to go through all these different examples and kind of run through some of these I've actually been to in person, and I can tell you about my experiences there. This first one is actually one of those. It's St. Paul's Cathedral in London. And in St. Paul's Cathedral, there's this dome at the very top, and it's both a dome and a circular section of the building. So we've talked in other episodes about concave surfaces and how that focuses sound. Well, this whispering gallery is what it's called, and looking at an outside view of the building here on the screen right now, you can see that dome and the circular upper portion. My wife and I, we actually took our honeymoon in London, and so we walked all the way up to the whispering gallery, which is about 376 steps to get up there, and there's no elevator, of course. You just got to trek it up there. But I was so excited to get up to the top because the whispering gallery is something that I'd read about, and it's one of those things where it's pretty far across. You'll see here on the screen, I've got a photo of that space. It's a really large diameter circle. And you can stand on one side of it and just turn your head to the right and just whisper. And the person on the opposite end, exactly opposite of where you are, can hear you clear as day, as if they're standing right next to you. And it's just a cool phenomenon. Like I probably spent way too much time in here and maybe missed a couple of the other sites in London because of it. But it's got this beautiful view of you can see from the Whispering Gallery down to the main part of the sanctuary. And the reason that this happens is just a focusing, and it's something where if I look at this diagram here, you've got a talker on one side, a listener on the other, and if you angle your voice to the side, it just skips around that concave surface until it hits the other side. It's not nearly as luxurious as this is, but this also happens at I think I mentioned maybe in another episode, a bar at the Hard Rock Casino in Vegas. Any sort of concave domed surface can have this focusing thing. And Sir Christopher Wren, who was the architect for St. Paul's Cathedral, he's known to be like super detailed in everything that he does. And so it makes you wonder, like, was the Whispering Gallery something in the smooth surfaces that he put on everything in that area? If it was intentional, that this kind of phenomenon might happen. And we won't know, but it is kind of a cool little byproduct of this design and something you can experience.
There's one like that granted, it's not as cool as what this is, but at Ball State, they have what they call the Whispering Wall. It's one of those iconic things on campus.
Yeah.
But it's the exact same thing where it's basically a maybe 4 foot tall brick wall.
Yep.
That exact same deal. If you stand on either side of it, you can whisper and the other person can hear it. The other one is that I feel like someone mentioned that the U.S. Capitol building, I think, is also set up like that, where there's something similar to that.
Yeah, and there's even like here in Indianapolis, for one of the news stations, I did a feature on there's a bench downtown, like kind of near the War Memorial, that has that same effect. And so any sort of concave surface will do it, but it definitely is something fun to experience.
Yeah, it's really cool.
All right, this next one is Horseshoe Canyon in Utah, and it's a pretty iconic photograph from this view that you see here. Is that where the body of water kind of works its way around and creates this horseshoe effect. And within Horseshoe Canyon, there's the Horseshoe Canyon or Canyonlands National Park, but then there's the Horseshoe Canyon that's out further up here in the northwest corner of this map. And in that Horseshoe Canyon area, there's a canyon that runs all the way through and kind of snakes its way through there. That's got these kind of inscriptions or drawings that are on the wall. And these are pretty tall. Like some of them are 7 or 8 feet tall, and they've got a kind of an interesting look to them. Some of them look a little bit like alien structures, and but yeah, they're throughout the canyon. You'll find these guys, and someone was wanting to study like why are they located in these spots, because there's a bunch of areas with flat sections of the canyon where it's like that'd be a perfect place to put one of these this imagery, but it wouldn't be there and it would be other places. And so people have been studying it and like wondering, the civilization that was there and why they chose to put them in the locations that they did. Like was it just haphazard and random, or was there a meaning behind it? And someone decided to do an acoustical study of it. Okay. And the cool thing was they took acoustical testing throughout the canyon. So this is a map of the canyon there, and the dots represent where they took acoustical measurements. So like throughout the entire canyon, they took acoustical measurements. And the weird thing is that this graph here is the y-axis is echo strength, like how loud the echo was returning back to the mic location, and that's associated with this top line of the graph. Then the x-axis is the test location code number, so they took 81 measurements throughout the canyon. And then this axis here on the right side is the rock art presence, and that corresponds with this line at the bottom. So if it's a 0, there's no rock art. If it's a 1, it means there's rock art present in that location. And notice the echo strength, how there's a little blip here at the first one where it's a little bit louder echo, but then big echo change here at this location, another big echo change there at that location, and all the places where this imagery was on the canyon walls was an area where the echo strength was really great. And it's something where cultures back then, they had a belief that, with supernatural beings and lightning and thunder and wind and echoes was like all part of what they believed in. And when you're in these canyons and you were to clap your hands or shout or anything like that, it would sound like there's voices coming from the rocks.
Wow.
And that is where these imagery was located at. And it was like something where they probably experienced it and then decided to put, the imagery with what they're hearing, and I think that's just really cool. That's one on my bucket list. Like I want to get to Horseshoe Canyon to be able to see that in person and experience it.
Just take a company field trip.
Okay. Yeah, we could do that. That'd be really fun. All right, the next one, which maybe won't be a company field trip, is in France, but it's some caves in southern France. And in this cave, there's actually a lot of different types of imagery. There's like some images of a horse here and there, and like, but there's something strange where there's these red dots in certain parts of the cave, and the red dots are not very big, like maybe this large, and throughout the cave, like this shows a graph of there, or a map of that cave. You'll notice these red dots that are in different locations. And back then, it's like to be able to navigate a cave, they would use all sorts of things, and it's dark, right? So it's easier to use sound than it would be for visually be able to tell where you were.
Sure.
And every location where there's a red dot is actually a place where it's a perfect resonance for a certain note. And so people could hum or whistle at a certain note, and if it resonated and filled that space, then you would know what part of the cave you were in.
Wow.
And so it's like it was more of like at least theory is that it was a navigation tool, and that's why these locations existed.
Wow.
And so it was kind of weird that areas where there's really paintable surfaces or things that they could do stuff in, that it wasn't there, but they would have it in the places where there's just a resonance.
Wow.
So yeah,
that's really interesting.
Pretty fun. The next one here is Stonehenge. And Stonehenge is, there's all sorts of theories of what happened at Stonehenge and why was it created and how was it created. Yep. And there's actually a theory on acoustically, like what kind of acoustical ramifications that design and how that impacts that space. I have a funny story about Stonehenge. I was in London when I was working for my past company, and I was going out for a job on the coast. Mm-hmm. And the driver I was with, his name's Paul Eastwood. He's a rep there. Mm-hmm. And he drove me out to the job. We spent the day there doing testing at the studio. And on the way back, Paul was just like, I'll just take a different route home because you'll see different scenery or whatever. And we come up over a ridge, and Stonehenge is right there.
Wow.
And I was like, did you mean to take me by Stonehenge? And he's like, I forgot it was on this route. Like, he didn't even know. And for me, it was like a huge deal. Like, I get to see Stonehenge. And by that time, like, you had to have guided tours because unfortunately, some people decided it'd be good to deface Stonehenge and graffiti and all of that. And so I couldn't get super close to it, but it was just amazing to see it in person. And that was even before I knew some of these acoustical things that were going on with it. But here's an aerial view of Stonehenge. It's estimated to be constructed between 3000 and 2000 BC. And before it was a complete circle. Like right now, you can see a lot of the stones have fallen down. Mm-hmm. Over time they just either disintegrate and fall, or potentially people have removed some as well. But it was a complete circle at one point. Here's actually kind of a computer graphic showing what it used to be, where it was completely circular and had tops to all of those all the way around. The interesting part acoustically with this is that all of the stones that face the inner part of the circle are either flat or concave. So we're looking at kind of a cross-section view here of the stones, and this flat section that's here on the left side of this stone, that's the part that faces the inside of the circle. Mm-hmm. And then the back was always just like really rough and doesn't look like it's been altered at all. Sure. And so it was like an intentional thing for this to be flat for some reason. Some of them you can see on the right-hand side are even a little concave in nature. But the back side are usually very rough and not something that would reflect sound very well. It would scatter sound. But all the inside pieces are flat or concave. There's actually out in Washington State, there's the Mary Hill Memorial, which was a 2-scale replica of Stonehenge. So you can actually go and experience it here in the United States and be able to hear some of this acoustical phenomenon that we'll talk about. But some people have done some modeling of Stonehenge and showed that if you had a sound source in the center, like this is a kind of a heat map where red would be very loud, and then it would go to orange, yellow, and green, and then blue in varying levels of decibel level. And so if you're within the circle, right, you see it's all red inside of here. And so you have a sound source in the circle. All of that reflection that's coming back is containing some of that sound and reinforcing it. And if you were standing inside the circle, let's say sometimes people think that Stonehenge was used for like ritualistic purposes or what have you. And I wonder if this was kind of the beginning of the saying being within the inner circle, like something like that, to where if you were inside the circle of the stones, you'd be able to hear and understand things very well. But if you stepped outside of that and the further you got away from the inner circle, you wouldn't be able to hear things as well.
Wow.
And so people have done these types of studies. I mean, again, there's also astrological things going on with Stonehenge. There's so many different things, but there is an acoustical impact of the way that place was designed.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So the next one here is a Greek theater. Okay. So there's a lot of different things with Greek theaters that were done. And one of them being that in a theater like this, the one that I'm showing on screen here, you have this kind of sloped, raked seating that is happening. And one of the ways, because they didn't have speaker systems, they didn't have things that they could amplify the voice like we do now. And so what they would do is fill jars, like earthenware jars, with different levels of water to correspond with the resonant frequency of that jar. They try to match the actor's voice with that, so that when the voice would hit the jar, it would resonate and then carry that sound further up the side of the amphitheater, which is just amazing, to have that kind of technology and just to use what you have available to you to get the job done, because that's a 2,000-3,000 seat arena that they could get sound back to the furthest rows because of doing that.
This is one of those things that, like, previously I had worked in like live sound concerts and venues and things. And so like hearing about this kind of thing and like seeing where we are now, just like seeing the comparison, it's crazy how advanced this really is.
Yeah.
Like, while also how simple it is, but just how they would accomplish what we do with a PA now with simple items.
Yeah.
It's wild.
It's pretty amazing. The other thing that they would do in Greek theaters is they would have a lot of times they would end up having a mask that they would wear. And some people have done some studies on the mask itself and the way that it's shaped, where it helps with projection and help to get that sound out to the audience a lot better than if they just had no mask at all, honestly. And so it's almost like a megaphone of some sort to be able to project that out. The skein is also something that you see in this photo right here. Is some of the early Greek theaters did not have a skein, and a skein is this wall that goes behind the stage area there. And the reason for that is that, imagine you're speaking on stage as an actor, and you turn upstage and your back is now to the audience. In previous designs, and it was wide open, your voice would just go away and no one would be able to hear you. So the skein helped to reflect some of that energy off of the back wall of the stage and get back to the audience as well. There's even some of these Greek theaters they've studied where the material and the type of stone that they would use for the seating area was uniquely absorptive in frequency ranges to balance out speech. Like, how we talk about in some rooms where the low frequencies overpower mids and highs. Some of the best Greek theaters have a certain type of stone that is more absorptive in certain areas to balance out speech intelligibility. And it's something where it's probably iterative, like they built a certain theater and they're like, wow, that one performed a lot better than the last one. We're going to use the same materials, but it is a kind of cool like byproduct of what they were doing. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to talk about is this is a place in Greece. It's a Treasury of Atreus, and what it was a actually kind of a tomb of some sort. Let's keep it light on the podcast here. But it was a tomb where it was underneath the ground. So this is a photo actually of this place, and there's this corridor that you walk down through, and there's an opening there. And you would then walk into this next photo, which is basically a beehive-shaped room that is super tall in the center. I think it's, I want to say it's around 65 feet or so in the center. And the crazy thing about this is that this space was used as a tomb, and it was to honor the dead. And there's a dead spot. If you stand right underneath the peak of this ceiling, it's like so much cancellation is happening where it's super, super quiet. But then when you walk to the edges of it, you start to hear from the wind coming down the tunnel and that opening, the way it's sized and the way the space is built, you start to hear like bees buzzing. And back then, the Greek actually associated bees with immortality. And it's a tomb, and you wonder, like, again, it's like which came first, the chicken or the egg? It's
Right.
like, did they build this structure? It was the tomb for the dead, and then they're hearing these bees all the time. Like maybe that's what kickstarted it. But
Sure.
if it was intentional, I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, we tried to do that today, and we'd probably fail. You know, like that wouldn't pull it off very well. But yeah, when you're walking around the perimeter of this, you can hear the buzzing of bees all the way around the perimeter until you stand in the very center, and it's quiet.
Wow.
Yeah, it's kind of freaky. Again, one I have not visited. Maybe it's another field trip at some point. The next one is one that I did visit. It's Chichen Itza in Yucatan, Mexico. And this is the Great Pyramid there, the Castillo Pyramid. And there's a lot of cool things going on with this pyramid. And one of which is that it's 2 days of the year, the solstice, the winter and summer solstice. You'll notice down the edge of the pyramid there's kind of like what looks like a snake slithering down the edge, and at the very base of it is a snake's head. And the snake's head gets lit up on just the days of the solstice. And it's amazing because it's this huge pyramid, and they calculated it out to be able to make that happen on just those 2 days of the year. And so they would use it for like when to plant and harvest their crops, and that would be part of it. And the interesting thing about this pyramid too is that if you were to excavate it, underneath this pyramid is like a 1/3 scale model of it. It's not like there's any rooms inside of this or anything like that. It's like they tried it once, and then they got better at it, and they built it over top of it and made it what it is today. Wow. And so it's like this kind of trial and error period. The other thing that's interesting is that you'll see on certain sides of the pyramid, there are stones that have been removed, and it's on the sides of the pyramid that there's nearby villages. And over the years, as they're building their towns, they would come and scavenge off of the pyramid and take those stones back and build their homes out of it. Wow. So this phenomenon I'm going to tell you about doesn't happen on the side where people have taken stones away. Sure. Like it no longer works on those sides. But there's two sides of it that still work, that if you clap at the base of that pyramid, the echo you hear coming off the pyramid sounds like a bird chirping. And it's wild. It's something where like you can clap your hands, you can make, I do the click sound, and it comes back as what's called a chirped echo. Yep. And the wild thing is that the Mayans who built this used to worship the cuckoo-can bird. Right. And the cuckoo-can bird looks like this. It's a nice looking fellow. And they used to worship this guy, or it was part of their worship involved this type of bird. And some people did some acoustical studies of that chirped echo that comes off of the pyramid and the cuckoo-can bird chirp. And if you put them next to each other, they're identical. Yeah. Like the way that the sounds decay, the frequency response, all of that stuff is identical to this bird. And so again, it makes you wonder, one, did they build this pyramid and then said, wow, that sounds like that bird. That bird must be important, and let's worship it. Or was it something that was intentional, which again would be extremely difficult to try to pull off. Right. But the fact that they built like a 1/3 scale model before, and then they did this afterwards, you never know. Like you never know what they're. I always say the Mayans, like they weren't distracted by social media like what we're doing right now, and they had all sorts of observatories on the campus there, and who knows what they were capable of without distraction.
That's one too. I remember when you first told me about this, and I looked it up on YouTube, and even you can hear it on videos even. It is crazy the effect that it has.
Yeah, my wife and I went there for a vacation once, and she's literally like pulling me away from it because I was wanting to just keep clapping and listening to it. But yeah, it's pretty wild. Yeah. And on that campus, there's actually another thing, and it's wild because you clap at the base of the pyramid and you hear the chirped echo, and then you hear what's like coming from behind you. You hear like a rattlesnake sound, like kind of. And they also the snake was a big part of their kind of rituals and all of that. And right down the way, maybe a football field or so away from that pyramid, is this great ball court where they used to play this game, which doesn't sound like a game I would want to play necessarily. It is instead of a basketball hoop, it's kind of like a hoop, but it's turned on its side. And they used to play with this ball that you couldn't use your hands or your feet. You had to like hit it with your elbows or knees or things like that. And the goal was to hit it through this hoop. The thing is that if you hit it through the hoop, you were sacrificed. So the winner gets to be sacrificed to the gods, and so it's not really a game I'd like to play. But the crazy thing is that this ball court all the way down, there's imagery of snakes like throughout the walls, and even you can see at the base of the wall. So you see the hoop there in the upper left-hand corner of this photo, but then you have a snake running down the side. But all along the wall too, there's etchings of snakes. And when you stand in the middle of this ball court and clap your hands, you hear a flutter echo that sounds like a rattlesnake. And so I can imagine how intense this game was. People are playing literally to the death, and the whole time, anytime the ball smacks the wall, then you get this flutter echo, and it sounds like a snake, and it's just pretty intense. But you can actually hear it all the way from the pyramid. You can hear that bird chirp, and then the sound of you clapping also echoes off of there, and you hear the rattlesnake going on.
Wow.
And then the flutter echo of that great ball court actually looks like this, where you have like very rhythmic and evenly spaced reflections that come back. And here's like kind of an overall view of that ball court. And also an interesting thing is that at the end of each one of these, you see the parallel walls on the sides, but then on the ends, there's places where the leaders would stand on those platforms. And because of that big flat section there, they could speak to each other really easily because it would reflect off of that and guide it to the other side. So the leaders could speak to each other from either side.
Wow.
Yeah. Crazy, right? So I'm just like fascinated. There's so many different other examples of this in history, and actually there's a couple websites I want to bring everybody's attention to. One of them is called sonicwonders.org, which is actually a way that you can find where these are located at. I think they have like an interactive map where you can choose and find out where these places are located at, the ones we talked about and others. And then there's also a website called ancient-acoustics.com that it has more information on Archaeoacoustics. But the main thing, a lot of this was taken from this book, Archaeoacoustics. You can find that online. We'll put a link in the description for it. But it is really fascinating. There's so much going on because we just talked about the architectural acoustics side of things, but there's also a lot of things in here about different types of musical instruments and how they evolved over time, and just fascinating stuff. Again, doesn't involve studio design or designing churches or performance halls, but I just find it fascinating. I thought that you guys might too.
Yeah, it is really cool. And again, it's just kind of crazy, like how advanced some of these things were way back when, compared to now. So
yeah,
no, it's awesome.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much for humoring me with this episode and allowing me to talk about Archaeoacoustics, and really would appreciate you guys being here and being part of the Sound Project. Please like and subscribe. Share this with anyone that you might think would find this amusing or interesting. And if you have any other topics you'd like us to cover, you can email us at info@haversickdesigns.com or comment below. Appreciate you being here, and we'll see you next week.